Hi everyone, welcome back to art. This week we are going to be making a landscape painting. A landscape is a type of artwork that shows outside. So the first thing we are going to do on a piece of paper is draw with pencil an outside landscape. You could choose to show land that you see outside your house, so maybe you see trees in the ground, maybe a slight hill. Maybe, depending on the type of year, there might be bushes or flowers on the ground. Or you could show land somewhere else. Maybe you've gone on vacation somewhere where there's mountains or where there was an ocean or a lake. Anywhere outside is fine to show. I'm going to show what I see right now out my window. And I'm going to draw that with pencil first. Okay, I'm done with my pencil sketch. I didn't press too hard, but I hope you can still see it. So the landscape I drew was mostly what I see outside of my window right now. I see a path that's going. I see a few, they're not quite hills, but almost hills. They don't go up very high. And I see a tree that was close to me, and some trees that are far away, and some that are kind of right in between. I looked at the sky and I didn't see any clouds in the sky today, so I didn't draw any clouds. Remember, you don't have to have your landscape show what's outside your window. If you wanted to, you could look up a picture of a landscape somewhere else and draw that, or you could draw one from your memory that maybe you've seen before. But I chose to draw what was outside my window. Now the next step is going to be to paint our landscape. If you have watercolor paints like these, you may use them. I might use just one color just to do a reminder about how to use these, but most of us probably don't have those watercolor paints at home. They're still at school. So I'm going to show you how you can use washable markers like these. They don't have to be Crayola brand, but just as long as they're washable, not permanent. I'm going to show you how to take these plus water and then either a paintbrush, or if you don't have a paintbrush, something like a Q-tip that's soft at the top will also work. If you don't have a Q-tip either, but you have like some paper towels, you could use a paper towel to kind of bunch it up so that it's soft, dip it in the water like I'm going to dip my paintbrush. You're also going to need a second piece of paper. This piece of paper, it doesn't matter what it looks like. So don't use a plain piece of paper if you don't have very many. Maybe use one, like I'm going to use, that this was one that I made a mistake on, and I'm going to recycle it anyways, because this piece of paper is actually going to be my paint palette. Okay, so I'm going to show first how to turn markers into paint. So I'm looking at my drawing and I'm thinking, what are the colors I'm going to need the most of? And since I have a lot of trees, I'm going to need brown. Some of my trees I see have green leaves and some have started changing to fall color leaves. So I'm going to use a lot of this, and then I'll probably use some blue for the sky. I'm not going to do all these colors at first. I think I'll just start with green and brown. What I'm going to do is color a section of my paper fully colored in with the green and another section fully colored in with the brown. And I go over it a few times with the marker just to make sure there's a lot of marker there, because that marker on the paper is what I'm going to turn into a paint palette in a minute. So let me show you as I do this. Here's my brown. I go over it once, and I go over it twice. Here's the green. Color it once, color it twice, maybe even 3 times. All right, now I am going to get my water. You see all this. And I'm going to dip my brush into the water so it's nice and wet. And I'm going to rub that wet brush on one of my colors like this. After I've rubbed it a minute or two, now on my paper I can start to paint, and look what happens. That marker, since it's washable, when the water comes onto it, it turns into almost like a paint. And I'm going to keep repeating that till I fill in this tree. So I dip my brush in the water, I rub it on that brown spot that I made on my paper, and then I can paint in my tree. Now it's a little light, But that's okay. I can still see the color. Sometimes watercolor artists like and prefer to use a lighter color. When on your paint palette, when I notice that brown is starting to get lighter and lighter, what I can do is just color another spot of brown and do it again. So I'm coloring that spot, getting a wet brush, rubbing that wet brush on it, and then painting in my tree. I have to keep getting my brush wet and keep rubbing it on this spot for it to stay like paint. All right, I'm going to fill in all my brown spots now, and then I'll get back to you when I'm ready to do the other colors. Okay, now I'm ready to use some of my green. I'm going to do the same thing. Get a wet brush, rub it on that green spot on my paper, and then I can paint with it. I can even mix colors. If I wanted some brown to go in with that green, I can get some brown and paint on top of that green, and now those colors mixed. All right, I'm going to keep repeating this until I have painted in all or most of my picture here. I'm going to color on a scrap piece of paper, really color and fill it in with a washable marker. I'm going to get a paintbrush or something that's similar to a paintbrush that's soft on one side. I'm going to get it wet and rub it on one of the colors, and then I'm going to paint with it on my paper. Once I have filled in more, I will show you what it looks like. If there are some colors that when you go with your brush to rub and color on your paper and they're just so light you can barely see them, here's a different thing you could do. Right on your landscape, you could color in the area you want to be that color, or almost color it in. So like I want some yellow on this tree and this tree. Then with my brush, I will get it wet, and then I can rub the wet brush right there on the paper, and that will also help to turn it into a watercolor paint. Just make sure you color and you rub your brush in the areas that you want that color to be on, because you won't be able to erase it. Alright, I've colored in most of my painting except for the sky. I'm still going to go back and do the sky, but I like to wait for everything to be dry before I do the sky, because I know if I have one color that's wet of watercolor, another color that's wet, and they're touching, they tend to bleed or mix together, and I don't want that to happen. So when everything's dry, then I'll go back and add my sky. But first I wanted to show you a couple things I was doing. So I only have one green marker, but I wanted to show different shades and different kinds of green, just so you could see the difference in my hills and the difference between my trees. So what I did was, for one of my hills and one of my trees, I colored green by itself. For another hill and another tree, I colored green and then I colored brown on top of it. And then when I took my wet brush and rubbed it on top, it mixed the green and the brown to create a different kind of green. I could have done that with green and yellow to make more of a lime green. I could have done green and blue to make more of a teal, but you can still mix colors this way, which is really nice. Another thing I wanted to show that I'm about to do now. Some things, to me, just seem a little too light. Like this tree that's right up next to me, I can see it looks a lot darker, but that's the color of brown that my brown marker was making. But that's okay. I painted that first, so it's already dry. So what I'm going to do after it's dry, I'm going to add another layer of that brown color. So I'm going to color again with brown, touch it with my wet brush, and paint over it again to add another layer. I'm going to do this in a few areas that I want to be a little bit darker. Okay, here's my artwork with an extra layer on a few areas. I added an extra layer to kind of show a shadow on this tree. I added an extra layer to show shadows under those trees and those ones, and I just made some areas of my grass a little bit darker. Now I'm going to wait for it to dry, and I'm going to add my sky. I could add my sky the same way, where I color on the paper and add water, or if you have the watercolor paints, you could use those watercolor paints. I think I'm going to use these just so I can show that in case anyone has these at home. So I'm starting by adding water, a wet brush to my blue. I'm dipping it in the water, tapping it on the blue. Dip, tap, tap. Then I'm swirling it on the blue, but not for too long because I don't want my sky to be too dark. Then I'm going to start painting with it. If I think that blue is too dark, I'm just going to add some more water and spread it out on my paper so that it becomes a little bit lighter. Right now, the sky that I'm looking at is very light blue, so I want this to be also a very light blue. Maybe the sky you're painting is dark because you're showing nighttime, or maybe it's a sunrise or sunset, so you have lots of colors in your sky. Or maybe it's a stormy sky, so it's gray or almost green if it's like a tornado. But I am carefully taking my sky color and painting around everything I already painted, and I made sure it was all dry before I started painting it. Oops, that was too dark. Alright, still a little wet, but I am finished now with my painted landscape. The last thing I need you to do is upload a picture or a video of your landscape onto Schoology and tell me what a landscape is. So I'm going to say my sentence now in this video. You could type your answer or say it in your video. Here is my landscape. A landscape is an artwork that shows land or shows outside. See everyone next week.